The security guard didn't touch her. He didn't have to. He simply stepped into her path, squared his shoulders, and said, loud enough for the couple behind her to hear, "Ma'am, this event is by invitation only." Serena Ashford heard it. So did the man in the tuxedo standing 3 feet away, holding a glass of champagne he'd already half finished. He looked at the guard, then at the woman being stopped, and looked away again. The way people look away when something uncomfortable is happening, and they've already decided it isn't their problem. The woman being stopped was Laurel Mensa. She was 41 years old. She was wearing a midnight blue gown that had been fitted to her in Paris 6 weeks earlier. Around her neck was a single strand of South Sea pearls. She had arrived at the Morrison Whitfield Children's Foundation Gala in a car that cost more than most people in that ballroom made in a year. She had been on the cover of Forbes. Twice. None of that was visible to the security guard. What was visible to him was a black woman he didn't recognize, standing at the entrance to a room full of people he was paid to protect from exactly this kind of interruption. "I have an invitation," Laurel said. She did not raise her voice. She had spent 2 decades not raising her voice. "Then I'll need to see it." She opened the small, beaded clutch and produced the card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering, the gold seal of the foundation in the lower right corner. The guard took it. He looked at it. He turned it over, as though the back might tell him something the front hadn't. "I'll need to verify this," he said. "Of course," Laurel said. She stood at the edge of the entrance while he walked to the check-in table. She kept her hands loose at her sides. She could hear the string quartet inside. Something slow, elegant. She had been to enough of these events to recognize that particular brand of music, the kind that filled expensive rooms and made the expensive people inside them feel that their money had purchased not just a ticket but a quality of air. She had grown up 30 miles from this hotel, in a house where the air quality was whatever came through the windows they couldn't afford to replace. She thought about that sometimes, not bitterly. More the way you think about a former version of yourself when you're standing somewhere that version couldn't have imagined. The guard came back. "I apologize for the wait," he said, and his voice had changed slightly, softened at the edges. Someone at the table had apparently looked her up. "It's fine," Laurel said. It was not entirely fine. But she went inside. The Morrison Whitfield Gala was one of those events that functioned as both charity and theater. People came to give money. Yes, but they also came to be seen giving money, which was a different thing entirely. The venue was a historic hotel in downtown Atlanta. High ceilings, chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls, round tables dressed in white linen and centerpieces that cost more than the minimum gift suggested on the invitation. Laurel had been invited because her company, Tessera Systems, had provided the software infrastructure for the foundation's donor management platform. She'd done it at cost, as a gift, because the foundation served pediatric cancer patients, and she had personal reasons for caring about that particular cause. She had not asked for recognition. She had not expected any. She was here because one of the board members, a woman named Claudette Nwachukwu, who had known Laurel for 12 years, had called her personally and said, "Laurel, you need to come. There are people you should meet." She found her table, 8 seats, 5 already occupied. She introduced herself to the 2 people on her immediate left, a cardiologist from Emory and his wife, and settled in with the particular kind of quiet ease she had learned to carry in rooms like this. The ease of a woman who had once been deeply uncomfortable in these spaces and had worked long enough that the discomfort had calcified into something more like patience. The evening moved the way these evenings move. Cocktail hour. Seated dinner. A video presentation about the foundation's work. Children in hospital beds. Doctors. Statistics about survival rates. Several people at Laurel's table reached reflexively for their phones and set them face down, which was the polite thing to do during this part of the program. Claudette found her during dessert and hugged her with the particular warmth of someone who actually meant it. "I'm so glad you came. You look beautiful." "You organized a lovely evening," Laurel said. "We're going to announce the new oncology wing tonight," Claudette said quietly. The Tessara pledge made it possible. I want people to know. Laurel felt something tighten in her chest. The instinct to redirect, to deflect. That really isn't necessary. It is, Claudette said, firm and fond. You let me do my job. She moved on to greet another table. Laurel watched her go with something that might have been gratitude and might have been apprehension in roughly equal measure. The table directly to Laurel's right belonged to the Harrington family. She noticed them the way you notice a particular sound sign in a room, not because it's the loudest, but because something about it snags your attention and won't let go. There were four of them. The patriarch, whose name Laurel would learn later, was Bradford Harrington, was a man in his mid-60s with the particular build of someone who had once been athletic and had since become comfortable. His wife, seated beside him in an ivory column dress with a diamond bracelet that caught the light every time she lifted her fork, was introduced in program materials as Vivian Harrington, Chair Emerita of the Foundation's Advisory Committee. She had helped found this gala 11 years ago. Her name was on a room somewhere in this hotel. Their son was there with his wife. The son, early 30s, the kind of jawline that photographs well, kept checking his phone under the table. His wife, blonde and wearing the particular expression of someone who has been to many of these events and stopped finding them interesting some time ago, was drinking her wine steadily and watching the room. What Laurel noticed about the Harrington table was not any one thing. It was the accumulation of small things. The way Bradford Harrington greeted people who approached him. A certain expansion of the chest, a hand extended from a position of deliberate stillness. The body language of a man who expected others to come to him. The way Vivian Harrington's eyes moved around the room, categorizing. She had been doing it all night, Laurel realized. It was subtle and probably unconscious. The kind of social sorting that became reflex when you'd spent decades in rooms where knowing who mattered was the most important skill you could bring. Vivian's eyes passed over Laurel twice during the dinner hour. Both times, they moved on without stopping, without registering, which was not, in itself, an insult. People looked at many things in a room like this without stopping. But Laurel noticed. She noticed because she had learned, long ago, to notice the specific quality of the gaze that moved through her rather than landing on her. She told herself it meant nothing. She was probably right. She ate her dinner. She listened to the cardiologist talk about a conference he'd attended in Vienna. She laughed at the appropriate moments. The announcement came at 9:45. Claudette stood at the podium, and the room settled into the specific quiet of people who have been socialized into attentiveness. She spoke about the Foundation's mission. She spoke about the new oncology wing, what it would mean for families in the region, the number of patients it would serve, the gap it would fill. Her voice, which Laurel had always found exceptionally well suited to this kind of occasion, carried both warmth and precision. Then she said, "The gift that made this wing possible came from a woman who asked for nothing in return, who has never asked for recognition for any of the contributions she has made to this community, and who is here tonight." Tessara Systems and its founder, Laurel Osai Mensah, committed $34 million to this project. The applause was immediate and genuine. People turned to find her. Claudette was looking at her table, smiling. Laurel stood, briefly, nodded, and sat back down. She was not comfortable with this part. She was not sure she would ever be. What she was aware of, in that moment, was the Harrington table. Specifically, she was aware of Vivian Harrington's face, the way it had changed, the particular quality of recalibration happening behind the eyes, a rapid, visible reassessment. Vivian looked at Laurel, then she looked at her husband. Bradford said something to her, quietly. She said something back. Laurel looked away. She told herself again that it meant nothing. The mistake happened 40 minutes later. The evening was winding toward its close. People were standing, moving between tables, conducting the last round of conversations before the drift toward the exit. Laurel was speaking with a hospital administrator named Patrick Ofosu, who ran the pediatric oncology unit at Grady, and who had specific, concrete ideas about how the new wing should be structured. She liked him immediately. He spoke about his patience, the way people speak about things that cost them something personally. She did not hear Vivian Harrington approach from behind. What she felt was the hand on her arm, a grip, firm and dismissive, the way you might take hold of a waiter's sleeve to get his attention. She turned. Vivian Harrington was looking at her with an expression that was not unkind, exactly, but that contained within it a certainty so absolute it had no room for doubt. "Excuse me," she said, "but I believe you may be at the wrong table. The catering staff entrance is through the back hallway, past the kitchen." The room did not go silent. That is the thing about these moments. They almost never play out the way they do in movies. The string quartet was still playing. The conversations around them continued. Patrick Ofosu had stepped a half step back, his expression frozen in the way of a person who has just witnessed something and is still processing what it means. Laurel looked at Vivian Harrington. She took in the certainty on that face, the complete, uncomplicated confidence of a woman who had made a categorization and felt no need to question it. "I'm not with the catering staff," Laurel said. Her voice was level. "I'm sorry? I'm not with the catering staff," she said again. "I'm a guest." Vivienne blinked. Something shifted in her expression. Not embarrassment, not yet, more like the first minor tremor before a larger recalibration. "Well," she said, "I simply thought." "You thought I worked here," Laurel said, not a question. A woman at the next table had stopped her conversation. Two men nearby had turned their heads. "I'm Laurel Osi Mensah," Laurel said, "Tessara Systems." The silence that followed was approximately 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Vivian Harrington's face performed a series of small, rapid adjustments. The kind that happen when a person's social training is working very hard to manage an emotion that their social training is also telling them not to have. "Of course," Vivian said. Her voice had changed, thinned. "I apologize. I don't know what I was." "It's quite all right," Laurel said. It was not quite all right. But she said it because she had learned that sometimes the most powerful response is the one that removes every excuse for drama. She turned back to Patrick, who was watching her with an expression that she would remember for a long time. Not pity, exactly, but something close to a kind of grief that comes from recognizing a thing you've seen before. "You were telling me about the wing layout," Laurel said. Patrick nodded slowly. "Right," he said. "Yes." And they continued their conversation. Bradford Harrington found her 20 minutes later. He was the kind of man who moved through rooms with the ease of someone accustomed to being received well, and his approach now carried with it the particular energy of a man on a mission of repair. He was smiling. It was a good smile. Practiced, warm, the product of 50 years of knowing when smiling was the correct tool. "Miss Osi Mensah," he said. "Bradford Harrington. I wanted to personally extend my apologies for what happened earlier. My wife can be," he paused, searching for the word, "direct. She meant no offense." Laurel looked at him. She said, "I appreciate you coming over, Mr. Harrington." "Your gift to the foundation is extraordinary," he said. "Truly extraordinary. Claudette tells me you've been supporting children's health initiatives for years. It's important work," Laurel said. He nodded. He smiled again. Then he said, "I have to be honest with you. I had been hoping to speak with you this evening regardless. We have a project, a significant infrastructure initiative, private-public partnership, federal components. We've been looking for a technology partner at the scale Tessara operates. I suspect this is a conversation we should have." Laurel studied him. She had been in business long enough to recognize the anatomy of this particular kind of approach. The apology that was also a pivot, the acknowledgement that was also a door. "What kind of timeline are you working with?" she asked. His expression warmed further. This was the language he understood. "We're hoping to have a partner committed before the end of Q3. The contract value is—" He lowered his voice slightly, the way people lower their voices when the number is large enough to require it, "in the range of 400 million over 5 years. Laurel nodded once. "Send me your team's contact information," she said. "I'll have someone from my partnerships group reach out." Bradford Harrington left that conversation looking like a man who had successfully navigated a difficult stretch of road. He went back to his wife and said something to her. Vivian looked across the room toward Laurel. Her expression was harder to read. What Bradford did not know, what he had no way of knowing, was that Laurel had, earlier that afternoon, received a call from her chief legal officer. The Morrison Whitfield Foundation had introduced them months ago as part of a larger consortium. There had been due diligence. There had been discovery. What her legal officer had found, buried in the Harrington Group's subsidiary filings, was a pattern of contractor relationships that raised serious questions about compliance. Questions that, once raised, did not go back to sleep. She had been planning to call Bradford Harrington's office the following week to begin a conversation about whether the partnership could proceed. That conversation had just become significantly more complicated. She did not tell him any of this. She watched him walk away. She thought about Vivian Harrington's hand on her arm and the complete absence of doubt on her face in that moment, and she made a decision. She called her chief legal officer from the car on the way home. "The Harrington deal," she said. "I want the compliance report on my desk by Friday. Full documentation." A pause on the other end. "Is this related to tonight?" "It's related to everything," Laurel said. "We don't move forward on anything until I've seen the full picture." She ended the call. The city moved past the window. Lights, overpasses, the particular dark of Atlanta at 11 at night, the skyline behind her now as the car moved toward the north. She had grown up north of here, in a house where the windows didn't seal properly, and her mother worked 2 jobs. And the question had never been whether Laurel was smart enough, but whether smart would be enough. She thought about that girl. She thought about the version of herself who had taken the MARTA to job interviews downtown at 19. Wearing the one blazer she owned, telling herself that the feeling of not belonging in certain rooms was a feeling she could outlast. She had outlasted it. What she had not been able to do was make it stop happening. The compliance report came in 3 days, not 5. Her CLO, a woman named Deb Kowalczyk, who had been with her for 8 years and who communicated bad news with the efficiency of someone who had learned that delay only makes it heavier, walked her through it in a conference room at Tessara's Atlanta office. The windows looked out over Midtown. Deb had the documents in a neat folder and a second cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The summary: the Harrington Group had, over a period of approximately 6 years, maintained a set of contractor arrangements that appeared on paper to be independent, but functioned as a mechanism for circumventing minority business requirements on federal contracts. It was the kind of thing that was difficult to prove without forensic financial analysis, and was very easy to document once you had one. "How solid is this?" Laurel asked. "Solid enough that I've already spoken to outside counsel," Deb said. "Solid enough that I want you to think very carefully about what you want to do with it." Laurel was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city moved. Taxes. People. The ordinary machinery of a Tuesday morning. "What are our options?" she asked. Deb walked her through them. They could decline the partnership, cite strategic misalignment, say nothing. They could escalate to the relevant federal oversight body, which was within their rights, and in certain contexts could be argued to be an obligation. They could also, Deb noted carefully, do both. "What would you do?" Laurel asked. Deb picked up the untouched coffee. "I've worked for you long enough to know that question is really asking me to tell you what you've already decided." Laurel almost smiled. "Am I that transparent?" "Only to me." She was quiet again. She thought about the children's wing, about Patrick Afosu talking about his patients with that particular grief in his voice, about foundation money and government contracts, and what it meant when the people who moved in certain rooms believed the rooms belonged to them by a right so obvious it didn't require examination. "We file the report," she said. "Then we issue a statement. We don't do anonymous." Deb nodded. She had expected this. "There will be a reaction." "There's always a reaction," Laurel said. The statement went out on a Thursday afternoon. Tessara Systems' communications team had drafted it 3 times before Laurel approved the 4th version, which was her own. It was 2 paragraphs. It stated that Tessara had declined to move forward with a partnership with the Harrington Group following due diligence that raised compliance concerns, and that the company had provided documentation to the relevant Federal Oversight Office. It named no specific individuals. It did not describe a gala, or a woman in an ivory dress, or a hand on an arm. It was a business statement about a business decision. It did not need to say more than that. The people who needed to understand it would understand it. The reaction came in waves. The first wave was surprise. Tessara was not a company known for making this kind of public move, and Bradford Harrington was not a name people expected to see in this kind of context. The second wave was more complicated. The financial press, the legal analysts, the people who began doing their own digging. By the following Monday, there were 2 federal inquiries. Vivian Harrington released a statement through a PR firm. It expressed confidence in the Harrington Group's legal compliance and disappointment at what it called the weaponization of due diligence by a competitor seeking advantage. It did not mention the Morrison Whitfield Gala. It did not mention an apology, or a woman in midnight blue, or a grip on an arm that had said everything it needed to say without using any words at all. Bradford Harrington called Laurel's office 4 times in the 3 days after the statement. She did not take the calls. Her assistant, a young man named Felix who had been with her for 2 years, and who had the particular calm of someone who handled difficult calls regularly, logged each one with the same neutral notation. Caller Harrington. Bradford. Seatsage. Requesting callback. Status. Declined. Claudette called on a Wednesday evening. "How are you doing?" she asked. Not "how is the situation," not "what happens next." "How are you?" "I'm all right," Laurel said. She was sitting on the back porch of her house in Buckhead, a glass of water on the table beside her, the kind of quiet around her that she had spent years building the life to afford. "I've been better. I've been worse." "You did the right thing," Claudette said. "With the report, I know. I also know that knowing doesn't always make it lighter." Laurel was quiet for a moment. The night insects were doing their thing. Somewhere on the property, the fountain in the garden made its small, continuous sound. "She grabbed my arm," Laurel said. "Vivienne. That's what I keep coming back to, not what she said. The grab. Like I was furniture, like moving me out of her way was an entirely reasonable thing to do." Claudette was quiet on the other end. "I've been in these rooms my whole professional life," Laurel said. "I know what it costs. I paid what it costs. And there are still people in those rooms who look at me and see the woman who doesn't belong there." She paused. "I don't think they'll ever stop." "Maybe not," Claudette said. "But the room is different than it was. Because of people like you. That feels like too much credit. Give yourself something, Laurel." She sat with that for a while after they hung up. The fountain made its sound. The night moved around her. She thought about the new oncology wing, about the children it would serve, children whose parents would drive them to that hospital with the specific terror and specific hope that every parent in that situation carries, about the fact that those children's treatment would be funded, in part, by $34 million that had come from a girl who grew up north of the city in a house with windows that didn't seal. She thought about the specific texture of Vivian Harrington's certainty, the way it had required no information, no pause, no moment of questioning its own premises, the way it had operated as smoothly and automatically as breathing. She thought about what it had cost the Harrington Group, not the federal inquiries, not the press, not the business consequences, though those were real and significant. She meant something simpler and more precise. The cost of a single moment when one woman's contempt operated faster than her common sense. It was a staggering number for such a small moment. She picked up her water. The ice had melted. She drank it anyway. In 2 months, she would attend the groundbreaking for the oncology wing. She would stand in a hard hat and hold a ceremonial shovel and think about her mother, who had worked double shifts at a hospital not very different from this one, 41 years ago, to keep them in that house with the broken windows. She would not cry, because she had not yet found the right moment for that. but she would feel the full weight of the distance between that house and this shovel. And for a moment, it would be almost too much to carry. Almost. She was used to carrying things. That was the part nobody ever put in the press release.